Hey guys, it's Allie, and today we are going to be talking about this book, The Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. So, Muse of Nightmares is the sequel and the end of the duology to this book, Strange the Dreamer, and in the interest of not spoiling things in Strange the Dreamer by telling you about Muse of Nightmares, I am just going to give you a brief synopsis of what this book is about. Strange the Dreamer follows our main character, Laszlo Strange, who lives and works in this massive library, and through a series of circumstances, he has an opportunity to leave the library and go to this city called Weep. And he's read a lot about Weep, and he has kind of imagined what it's going to be like once he gets there. He has a lot of preconceived notions, but when he actually does arrive, it is very different from what he anticipated, and his role in Weep is not what he had originally guessed. But through the course of his time there, he might have just found the best kept secret in all of Weep. Muse of Nightmares picks up right where Strange left off, and basically, without spoiling anything, I will just say that Laszlo comes out of the experiences of the first book as a changed man, and he now needs to protect those that he cares most dearly for through both the repercussions of what has happened at the end of Strange the Dreamer, and also to deal with new antagonists that are threatening the new relationships that he has developed over the last book, and maybe Weep itself. So if Strange the Dreamer or Muse of Nightmares sounds like the kind of book you would be interested in, then stick around because I have some thoughts about this book and I would love to share them with you either before or after you read this book for yourself. There are 5 main things that I either noticed or learned from reading this book, and the first of those is how masterfully Laini Taylor is able to utilize the third-person omniscient point of view. So I will talk about POV in another video, but for the purposes of this video, third-person omniscient point of view, if you don't know what that is the idea that the narrator who is telling this story is somewhere outside of the story. It is not one of the characters that we meet in this book. And not only that, but this narrator is omniscient, which means that it is able to access the thoughts and emotions and perspectives of each individual character simultaneously. They're not limited to just one perspective. Third-person omniscient point of view is very difficult to do. It is one of the hardest ones to write, and also can be one of the worst ones to read if it's not done well. But Laini Taylor is actually able to do this masterfully. It really reads like almost as if you can see a camera panning in her mind as the characters talk. There's always some kind of cue to let you know that the perspective is about to switch. So if a character is speaking to Laszlo and you are seeing things through her perspective, then when she speaks to Laszlo, Laszlo's reaction is in his own perspective, and then we start following him until such a point that Laini Taylor decides to switch it to some other character's perspective or back to the original perspective. But each time there is some kind of cue within the story to let you know that the perspective might change. And it doesn't always, but it does a lot of the times, and it does so flawlessly that you really don't notice it happening unless you are reading it carefully for that purpose. So if you are looking for an example in a very good use of third-person omniscient point of view, or if you're just the kind of person that finds that style of writing interesting, then this is definitely a good book for you. I absolutely adored it. I have had a lot of issues with omniscient point of view in the past in terms of not really liking books that utilize it, but this was done so well that it really is like a textbook in the third-person omniscient point of view. Continuity error, I'm putting this down because I don't want my arm to get tired, because this is a big boy. Okay. The second thing that I had my eye out for, both as a writer and as a reader in this book, is for the use of purple prose. Laini Taylor is a very lyrical writer. She writes things in a very prose, almost dreamlike way, which I think works very well for the story at hand, considering it is Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares. But I didn't notice it in the first book, though it was something that she got more criticism for, I'll say, from other people who read it. Again, I didn't notice it, and I also happen to really like lyrical writing. I think that if it's done well, it is really beautiful to read, and Laini Taylor, I believe, does it very well without going too over the top. But it was something that, since I had heard all of that criticism from the first book, I was on the lookout for it in Muse of Nightmares. And I have to say, I didn't see it in Muse of Nightmares. There were lyrical elements of the writing, but those tended to show up in the beginning chunk of the book, the first few chapters, when she is reestablishing the world, reestablishing this kind of dreamlike world that this story takes place in. And also, she uses that kind of writing in actual dream sequences and in scenes that are meant to be mysterious or foreshadowing. That is where her lyrical writing tends to really shine. Other than that, I did not feel like it was overdone. I did not feel like it went into the realms of purple prose. I thought it was perfect prose. I really did enjoy it, and I didn't see any issues with it either as a writer or as a reader. So if you are somebody who did read Strange the Dreamer and you are debating as to whether or not you want to read Muse of Nightmares because you're worried that it's going to have too much purple prose or that it's going to move too slowly, fear not. I urge you to give Muse of Nightmares a shot because it is significantly toned down from even what I remember in Strange the Dreamer, and it's just good. It's just good prose. So I really do think that you will enjoy it. The third thing that I wanted to mention, in the interest of being devil's advocate, was also on this topic of purple prose, or too much description versus too little description, and whether or not I thought Muse of Nightmares was overly wordy or under-wordy. And while, like I just said, I had no issues with it whatsoever in terms of just general dialogue, general scenes, or in dream sequences, or in foreshadowing sequences, things like that, I thought it was all perfectly prosy or just perfectly straight to the point, depending on what kind of situation and what kind of mood Laini Taylor was going for. I think they worked really well. However, the one thing, in the interest of being devil's advocate, I could say about the prose is that I did find myself skipping ahead a little bit when more action sequences started, because though the action sequences themselves were not written in purple prose, they were not overly flowy, she still was very descriptive, because Laini Taylor is a very descriptive writer. And I tend to, when I'm reading action, I want it to move quickly. I want to just see what happens next and have the pace really accelerate from more dreamlike or mysterious sequences like the ones I was talking about before. And so even though those weren't written in purple prose, I could see an argument for why people might dislike some of the action sequences or think the action sequences are too wordy. I don't think they're too wordy. I think I would have enjoyed them if I read them, but I tended to just kind of skim past them, because in action sequences you really want to narrow your focus. And so that's on me as a reader, but also for other writers out there, if that's something that you notice in your own writing, that you do a lot of description in action sequences, maybe consider cutting back on that a little bit, or don't, because you're the writer and you get to do what you want. So that is just my thoughts on the action sequences. In a more positive note, there were a lot of action sequences, and there were some action sequences in Strange the Dreamer too, especially towards the end of the second act and in the third act, but Muse of Nightmares was pretty much action-packed from the beginning, at least in terms of multiple discoveries. A lot of things are happening. There's a lot of moving parts. It's not all about world building, because the world has been established in Strange the Dreamer, so you really get to see the characters dig into this world and not just look at it on the surface and try to figure out what this whole place is about. You really have more of an opportunity to get into the action, and woo boy, there are some intense action sequences in this book, especially, like I said, in the second and third act. It goes crazy, and I would love to hear your thoughts of it in the comments below. I won't say anything because of spoilers, but if you want to leave a spoilery comment below, then just say spoiler and then we can chat about it, because it was crazy. It was intense. The fourth and final thing that I wanted to talk about before I get into my final thoughts on this book is the issue of young adult versus new adult versus adult. So the general idea behind this is that Laini Taylor's books, both Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares, deal with some pretty dark topics, and also the main character Laszlo is a little bit older than a typical young adult hero or heroine. I think he's somewhere in his 20s, mid-20s to early 20s. He's not like 29, but he's somewhere in his 20s age range. And because of those two things, in addition to some other smaller things, a lot of people think that this book doesn't necessarily fit well into the young adult genre and is more so of a new adult, something that is more for people who are in their late teens to early 20s can and should read. From the perspective of a reader, I don't see any reason why it can't be YA or that it has to be something older than that, just because Laszlo himself is a little bit older. I don't think anything about him is too adult for people to understand. However, from the perspective of a teacher, the topics that are addressed in this book, for me as a reader, I don't think they would have bothered me if I read this when I was 14, but from the perspective of a teacher, if you are somebody who is triggered by certain topics, or if you are somebody who is thinking of recommending this book to a younger audience, definitely do look into it a little bit deeper before you do read it or before you do suggest it to someone else. It does deal with some really dark themes. It's a dark book, and there's really no getting around that. I still think it is a very well done exploration of those topics. I don't think any of them are overdone, and I don't think that anything is done without purpose, but sometimes things are just triggering and sometimes things are just not right for a certain type of reader. So keep that in mind if this is something that you are considering reading. It is very dark. It is something that has been considered maybe more NA than YA, so if that's not something you're looking for, then maybe this isn't the book for you. So what are my final thoughts about Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor? It is probably, you've guessed from this whole review as a whole, but I loved this book. I give it a 10 out of 10, 5 stars on Goodreads, and I think it's just an A+ book. I think it is really just such a beautiful exploration of imagination and of dreams and of our experience as human beings and what we will do to protect those we love, and it's just really beautiful, and I loved it a lot, and I really do recommend this to you unless, again, you are not a fan of some of those things that I mentioned before. But if you are kind of open to anything, then this is definitely a great book. Obviously, you should read Strange the Dreamer first, but if you read Strange the Dreamer and weren't sure if you wanted to continue, or if you haven't read Strange the Dreamer yet and you want to see how it ends before you decide if you want to read the first one, then I say give this series a chance. It is only a duology. Yes, they're a little bit thick, but it's not anything that takes too long to read. I read this, I think, in less than a week, and that was with only reading 10 chapters a day, except for the one day that I read like 30 chapters because I was near the end and I had to keep going. So this is such a good book. It is obviously something that I like because I made this whole ranty review about it, but if this is something that is your cup of tea, then I very much recommend that you buy it or rent it out from your library, whatever it is you need to do to get your hands on this book that is legal and supporting of the author, then I suggest that you do it. So that has been my review of Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. I loved it. I hope you love it. If you did love it or if you didn't love it, let me know in the comments below. If you liked this video, then leave it a little like. And if you like my content in general, then go ahead and subscribe. I make videos every Friday. And I will see you guys in the next video.